Hello all, welcome to Quantifiers. So carrying forward our series on RC99, let's delve into the passage number 3. So without wasting much of the time, let's get directly into the passage and understand how the passage was. So suspicious as they are of Americans' intentions and bolstered by court rulings that seem to give them license to seek out and publish any and all government secrets, the media's distrust of our government, combined with their limited understanding of the world at large, damages our ability to, just a second, the ability, I need to drag on this, ability to design and conduct good policy in ways that media rarely imagine. So a very strong claim is being made by the author in the very first passage, paragraph of the passage. So what they are saying is that suspicious as they are of Americans' intentions and bolstered by court rulings that seem to give them, so them here basically refers to the media. So the media is suspicious of the American intentions and they are bolstered by the court rulings. Bolstered means supported or strengthened that seem to give them license to seek out and publish any and all government secrets. So what they can do is that they publish any and all government secrets. The media's distrust of our government, combined with their limited understanding of the world at large, damages our ability to design and conduct good policies in ways that media rarely imagine. So you can see here that the author is not very positive about the media, but the author is against the media. And he argues that media people are the one who are suspicious of the Americans' intentions of the government, okay? And they do not have this much amount of the knowledge. They have the limited understanding of the world. And as a result, what is happening is that it is damaging our ability to design and conduct good policy, okay? So because of the media interference, we are not able to create a good policy. So that is basically what the main essence of the para 1 is. Now let's go to the para 2. The leak through which sensitive information flows from the government to the press is detrimental to the policy. So the author is again carrying forward the same idea that the leak through which sensitive information flows from government to the press is detrimental, is harmful to the policy. So again, it's like he says that it damages our ability to design and conduct policy, and he's saying the same thing. Uh, so it's detrimental to the policy in so far as it almost completely precludes the possibility of serious discussion. So it's saying that it is because of this leak and all that, we aren't able to get into the possibility of a serious discussion. So the fear that anything they say, even in what is construed as a private forum, may appear in print makes many people, whether our own government officials or the leader of the foreign countries, unwilling to speak their minds. Okay, so what they're saying is that there's no freedom. So there's a problem of leak. So the concept of the leak was introduced here, and it is saying that why it is bad for the foreign policy. So now why it is bad for the policies, that because of this leak there is not a possibility of a serious discussion, and because the people involved with the serious discussion, they fear so much from the leaks that they don't speak up their mind. So they don't speak their mind. They're not willing to communicate openly. So that is what the para 2 is saying. Now let's see. Must we be content with the restriction of our leaders' policy discussions to a handful of people who trust each other, thus limiting the richness and varieties of ideas that could be brought forward through a large group because of the nearly endemic nature of this problem? Now, this is a question you may feel at one glance that the author is changing the stand, but it is actually a rhetorical question. Now, the rhetorical question is something where you're not expecting an answer to. It is to, let's say, to pass on a comment or something, right? So that is the basically the rhetorical question. So what this question is that, must we be content with the restrictions of our leaders' policy discussion to a handful of people who trust each other, thus limiting the richness and varieties of idea that could be brought forward to a larger group because of the nearly endemic nature of this problem? So the author is not agreeing to this. This is a rhetoric question. Now, it is vitally important for the leader of the United States to know the real states of affairs internationally, and this can occur only if foreign leaders feel free to speak their minds to our diplomat. So he said in the previous paragraph that they are unwilling to speak their mind. So they are unwilling to speak their mind, and now the author is telling that it is really important for them to speak their mind, okay, to get into the open communication with the foreign leaders. Then only will be able to know the real state of the affairs internationally, right? So he's saying that the media should not interfere. The leaks and everything are actually harmful, okay? It's bad for the foreign policy. Now, let's see, let's go to the para number 4. So until recently, it looked as if media had convinced the public that journalists were more reliable than the government. Okay, so what is this? Now, author is saying that now the people also started believing that the media are more reliable than the government. However, this may be changing. With the passage of the time, the media have lost luster. They have grown large and powerful, provoke the same public skepticism that others large institutions in the society do. A series of media scandals has contributed to this. Many Americans have concluded that the media are no more credible than the government, and the public opinion surveys reflect much ambivalence about the press. Okay, so now here the author is saying that the media was initially trusted by the public, okay, but now the media is being taken by skepticism, okay, because of their own scams and the other things. So the same public skepticism, so it has lost its luster, okay, and they are because of the scandals and other things. So people are not very much in favor of a media nowadays. Now let's go to the last paragraph, and let me drag on this cursor so I can read it in a better manner. Yeah. Okay, just a second. Yes, okay. So while leaks are generally defended by media officials on the ground of public's right to know, so media are, they are saying, they are justifying, okay, that why leaks are being justified. So they are saying that because everybody has a right to know. In reality, they are part of Washington political power game as well as part of the policy process. So author is not agreeing with whatever the media officials are saying. So the leaker may be currying favor with the media or maybe planting information to influence the policy. In the first case, he is helping himself by enhancing the prestige of a journalist. In the second, he is using the media as a stage for his preferred policies. In either instance, it closes the circle. The leak begins with a political motive, is advanced by a politicized media, and continue because of politics. Okay. So basically, what the author is arguing is that the leaks are usually because of a kind of a you can say a fabrication, okay, that is being done, that is to politicize media and because of political motive. So that is basically what the author is saying. Although some of the journalists think they are doing the work, they are more often than not instruments of the process, not prime movers. So the journalists have been put to an advantage to the other person, and they are just considering them as an instrument to achieve that particular target. So the media must be held accountable. So the author is saying, so it's a very, very strong claim that the media must be held accountable for their activities, just like every other significant institution in our society, and the media must be forced to earn the public's trust. So they've lost this public trust, which was being highlighted in the para number 4. So they are now again forced to earn that public trust. So on and on, the para 5 basically argues that leaks are being done because of a political power game, and that media is just the instrument in the hand of the people who wants that particular information to be circulated. And then the third claim that the author made in this para was that media must be held accountable for their activities. So overall, an easy passage to be understood about the media, about the politics. So in case if I have to give the overall summary of the passage, so it's that basically the author discusses the negative effects that the media leaks has on the foreign policy, and then he talks about the media's credibility also. So let's get into the questions without wasting much of the time. I hope you have understood the passage. Now, based on the information in the passage, with which of the following statements would the author most likely to agree? Okay, so it's an author's agreement question. So based on the information in the passage, with which of the following statements would the author most likely agree? Now, let's see this. So this was, let's do this with an option elimination because I think so that will gonna work more here. The options were, some were really confusing. Let's see, let's go ahead. So feeding the public misinformation is warranted in certain conditions. Now you see the option number B, the public has a right to know the real state of foreign affairs. So both of them are kind of a contradiction to each other. Let's keep on a hold and let's get into the option number C first. So the fewer the number of people involved in policy decisions, the better. So will the author will agree to this particular thing that fewer the number of people involved in policy discussions, the better. Let me just clear the drawings here. Yes, okay. So where this was, so there was this point, no? Must we be content with the restrictions of our leaders' polity discussions to a handful of people who trust each other, thus limiting the richness and varieties of idea that could be brought forward through a larger group because of the nearly endemic nature of this problem? So the author wants that this should not be done, okay? So there should be more richness and a varieties of idea and there should be more discussion. So from this, we can actually negate our option number C because the author believes that the policy benefits from a richness and varieties of ideas. So this was a rhetorical question for which the answer was no. So the author was expecting the opposite of it. So he prefers, so rather than limiting the richness and varieties of the ideas, he actually believes that a policy benefits from the richness and varieties of ideas. So this is not the author will agree to. Now, leaders give up their right to privacy when they're elected. Now, where is this case of leaders give up their right to privacy when they're elected? There's nothing that is being mentioned about elected. The author's point is kind of decrying that leaks is that privacy is a what he say, like let me just figure out like the lines leaders where it was being written. Yes, the government. So in so far, it constituted a public forum. People when any government are unwilling to speak their mind. So it is important. Yeah. So the leaders were mentioned here only. So it is vitally important for the leaders of the United States to know the real state of affairs internationally. And this can occur only if foreign leaders feel free to speak their minds to our diplomats. So it's written that the it's leaders give up their right to privacy. So he doesn't say give up, okay? Give up is surrender. So once they are elected, so they give up their right to privacy. So it's totally the opposite to what the author is saying. In fact, nothing sort of this idea is being mentioned. So it's an out of scope answer. So what he's saying that the leak should not be there because in case of the leaks is there, it hampers the privacy of the leaders, and because of that, the leaders are not able to speak their minds to our diplomats. But this is not being presented. Now, the media is not accountable to the public. So, why does the author will agree to this point that the media is not accountable to the public? In case if the author agrees that the media is not accountable to the public, then in the last line, the author would not have written that the media must be held accountable. So the media must be held accountable. So the author will not agree to this point that the media is not accountable to the public. So in that case scenario, the author will agree that media is accountable to the public. So author agrees that media is accountable to the public. So that is the reason that he has made this claim that the media must be held accountable. Okay. So that is a case that E cannot be the answer. Now A says feeding the public misinformation is warranted in certain situations. That is indeed the correct answer. Now let's see what's the problem with the option number B and why A is the correct answer. So B says the public has a right to know the real state of foreign affairs. Now the problem with this option is, first of all, either of the one has to be the answer. Either you give less or a misinformation to the public, or public has a right to know. You cannot say both of them cannot exist together, right? So that is the opposite for the reason. Now let's see what is the main idea. What the author is saying, let's get into the overall argument before looking at, before figuring out the answers between the option number A and B. So author says that leaders often say one thing in public and they say something other in the public conversation. So it's written here. Let me just clear the drawings. I hope now you're able to figure out why C, D, and E is not the answer. Now for this, let's get into it. Okay. Now, what is written here is that it is vitally important for the leaders of the United States to know the real states of affairs internationally, and this can occur only if foreign leaders feel free to speak their minds to our diplomats. Okay, so that is the case, and there was also one of them. The leak through which sensitive information flows is detrimental because it precludes the possibility of a serious discussion. The fear that anything they say, even in what is construed as a private forum, may appear in print makes many people, whether our own government officials or the leader of the foreign countries, unwilling to speak their mind. So in case if we club these two together, so what we can figure is that the author believes that there should be some sort of the discussion that should be limited only to the leaders of the foreign countries. Okay, it should not come open in a public. So there should be a some sort of, let's say, discussions that should be limited only to the leaders. Okay, and that is what is being conveyed by the option number A, that feeding the public misinformation is warranted in certain situations. Now, to talk about option number B, that the public has a right to know the real state of the foreign affairs, in case if the author will agree to this, then the entire purpose of writing the passage is defeated. I hope you're getting this, right? So that is the case that the author does not believe. So he knows that, okay, it is right to know. See, he say here, no, while leaks are generally defended by media officials on the ground of the public's right to know. So this is right to know is being defended by the media officials, but the author does not agree to it. The author believes that because of the fear that anything they say, even in what is considered as a private forum, may appear in a print media, so as a result of which they are not willing to speak their mind. So the author will definitely agree to something that maybe there should be certain discussions which are just limited to the foreign officials. So feeding the public misinformation is warranted in certain situations. So warranted is to make something right. So feeding the public misinformation is maybe right in certain situations. Now, the problem with this option you may figure out is that that why this is misinformation. So misinformation is not being written. So that is the reason that this makes this question a slightly tricky, I would say. Okay. Now, if the media and eventually the public, we have to make some certain inference. Like, let's say if the media and eventually public are fed with the wrong information, for instance, let's say there's a meeting about a secretary or something with the foreign leaders, and media is not being informed or they are being misinformed. Okay, so that means that the media will not be able to reach there. So media will not be able to reach there. So that means that there will be a private forum. There will be a more of a discussions, and the leaders will be able to speak their minds with the diplomats, which is for a greater good of the country, right? So maybe by that logic, we can say that the option A is the answer. And by option elimination also, none of them can be the answer. So that is the reason. I hope you understood this particular question, right? Now, implicit in the author's argument. So implicit, and that too in the author's argument, that means that the question is revolving around the assumption. So implicit in the author's argument that leak result in far more limited and unreliable policy discussions with foreign leaders is the idea that, okay, so it's a kind of a question is of an assumption, right? So because of the implicit aspect of it, so let's see here. So implicit in the author's argument that leaks results in far more limited and unreliable policy discussions with foreign leaders is the idea that. So author is saying that there are leaks, this is the reason, and what is the conclusion? That policy discussion is being limited. So this is the conclusion. And what is the author assuming from this fact to this conclusion? So the fact is there are leaks, as a result of which the policy discussion is being limited. Now let's see the options number. Now option A says that the leak should be considered breaches of trust and therefore immoral. So leak should be considered breaches of trust, okay, and therefore immoral. This is a distort option. Now the author does not like leaks, okay, but the author never argues that it is an immoral. Whereas the question of morality or immorality even comes into the picture. So A is cannot be the answer. Now leaks have occurred throughout the history of politics. We don't know anything from this. There is no evidence that proves that leaks have occurred throughout the history. So nothing being mentioned about the history of politics and all that not being mentioned. Now, foreign and US leaders discuss policy without inhibition before the rise of the mass media. Okay. Now, the problem is that the author never suggests that inhibition is kind of a barriers, you can say. So the author never suggests that there were no barriers to the discussion before the press. Only there are far more barriers now that the press is in the habit of leaking this discussion. But foreign and US leaders discuss policy without inhibition before the rise of the mass media. We don't know. Okay. What we know from the passage is what is happening after the rise of mass media. Okay. But what was happening before? Were they able to discuss policy without inhibition? Do they trust each other earlier? Okay, so were they comfortable to speak their mind earlier? So we don't know what happened before the media. So what we know is that what is happening right now because of the presence of the mass media. So we cannot comment on this. Okay, and anyhow, this cannot be the assumptions here. Now, leaders fear that public would react negatively if it knew the real state of affairs. Okay, this is indeed the correct answer. I'm going to keep it on a hold and let's see why E is not the answer. Now, it is best to keep the media in the dark. Now, again, this is, you remember, no, I told you that eliminate anything which is beast, you can say, broad, extreme. So this is an extreme. So it is best to keep the media in the dark. He'd never make this strong claim that it is best to keep the media in the dark and all that. So he says that, yes, in some of the cases, the media needs to be not involved in the private forum, but best to keep the media in the dark, an extreme option. Now, I hope with the option elimination, you are able to figure out why A, B, C, and E is not the answer. Now, let's see what is the case. So, leaders fear the public would react negatively if it knew the real state of affairs, right? Now, this is a valid assumption. So, what is the case? See, they are saying what is the author's argument. So, the author says that, so this is related to this para number 2, that leaks actually harm discussions I would say leaks harms discussions with foreign leaders. Now, what is the author assuming in this argument? The author argues that foreign leaders don't want their private thoughts to be made public. He must also therefore assume that so this is the case now. So the leaks harms discussion. So the leaks harm discussion. So what are the foreign leaders doing? So they are unwilling to speak their minds. So what is the author assuming? So the author is assuming that leaders have this fear. Why they are not able to speak their minds? Because leaders have this fear that in case if they're gonna speak openly, that the public would react negatively. Okay, so that is one of the reasons that they have this inhibition where they are not comfortable with speaking anything with an open mind, because somewhere at the back of the mind they have this, that what if in case if our conversation is being leaked and the people does not take us in a positive manner. So that is one of the ways. So he must also therefore assume that the author must assume that the leaders have some sort of reason for not wanting their you can say views to be made public, and D actually makes this clear. Okay, and there's a denial test no for the assumption. So let's do leaders fear the public would not react negatively if it knew. Your leader will not fear the public would react negatively. In case if we do the denial test for the assumptions and we turn the opposite of it, that if leaders didn't have this fear, if leaders does not fear that so we could say leaders does not fear the public would react negatively if it knew. So in case if leaders does not fear, then why would they not speak openly? So why wouldn't they would be limited, okay, limited discussion, then there will be a full discussion, they'll be able to speak their minds, right? So that is again one of the way to prove that the D is the correct answer. I hope you got the logic of this question. Now let's move on to the third. So third is an easy question. So what is the main idea of the passage? So main idea of the passage, we know that it is something that the author is not in favor of a media because it hampers the discussions in the foreign policy, to argue that the media is acting against the national interest. Now, maybe at a one glance, you may feel that this is a very a good option, but the problem again is here. Remember, beast, okay? So eliminate anything which is broad. So against the national interest, don't you think that the foreign policy is just a part of the national interest and it is not the national interest in itself? So it's an extreme option. So author to argue that the media is acting against the national interest? No, because there's a lot of other things in the national interest. The security is the one, the diplomacy is the one. So it is just limited to the foreign policy, and the national interest will be a very broad terminology. Now, to convince that journalists are attempting to enhance their own prestige, okay? Now, this was given, so this was kind of a sidetrack, which is true as per the passage, but this is not answering your question. So this, yes, this was a detail that to convince that journalists are enhancing. So this was being mentioned somewhere here. It is helping by in him helping himself by enhancing the prestige of a journalist. But the question is about the main idea. So main idea is something which is present in the passage from the beginning till the end. So where is this is just a one fact which was being given in a last paragraph of the passage. But is the para 1, para 2, para 3, para 4, para 5, every paragraph contributing to this idea? No, okay. So this is not the answer. Now to say, to discuss the negative effects that media leaks have on foreign policy and the media's credibility. Perfect, perfect, okay. Let's chunk this option and figure out to discuss the negative effects that media. So yes, the author throughout the passage was talking about the negative effects of the media leaks have on foreign policy. Yes, the foreign policy was the case. And the media's credibility. Yes, this credibility part was being raised here. It was being raised here. So that is the case, and it's a perfect answer. Okay. To criticize politicians for being dishonest in the public. No, okay. The author does not really criticize the politicians. Rather, he criticizes the media. Okay. He says that because of the media, so from the para number 2 and the para number 3, he says that because of the media, the politicians or the leaders aren't able to speak their minds. Okay. So it does not criticize politicians for being dishonest in the public, and it's not being mentioned. Okay. To suggest that the media needs to be regulated more strongly and effectively. Now, the authors only says that to, again, this is the main idea. So for the same reason that we negate the option number B, we have to negate the option number E also. But then there's what is the author saying about the regulation? So author is saying that the media must be held accountable for their activities, okay, just like every other significant institution, and the media must be forced to earn the public's interest. But to suggest that the media needs to be regulated more strongly and effectively, it's not the case. Okay, he never suggests anything about the strong and effective regulation. So you can say that this is an extreme. He just says that the media must be held accountable for their activities. That is the case. So by this logic, option C is the answer. So out of the 1, 2, 3, the 3 was the easiest of also, in case if the question number 1 and 2 have given you a slight trouble. So question 3 would be a sigh of relief for you. Now, based on the passage, when the media now challenge the actions of a public official, the public assumes that. Now, it has to be based on the passage. So nothing outside information needs to be brought into this particular thing. So somewhere it was being mentioned here that the media now challenge the actions of a public official. Yeah, it was their leaders and all that, and this occurs only. So recently, it looked as if the media had convinced that the public that journalists were more reliable. Just a second, I need to drag this cursor. Yes. So until recently, it looked as if media had convinced the public that journalists were more reliable than the government. However, this may be changing. With the passage of time, the media have lost luster. They have grown large and powerful, provoked the same public skepticism that other large institutions in the societies do. A series of media scandals have contributed. So many Americans have concluded that media are no more credible than the government, and the public opinion surveys reflect much ambivalence about the press. So based on the passage, when the media now challenge the actions of a public official, the public assumes that official is always wrong. No, the trend is actually changing. Okay. So the author argued that the public generally thought this is in the past. Okay. But that is not the case anymore. So as per the passage, initially they used to believe, they were gullible enough to believe whatever the media is saying, but the trend is changing. So that cannot be the answer. The media is always wrong. Now, this is also extreme, okay? Now, the public, what they are saying is that the media had convinced that they were more reliable. However, this may be changing. So, it is maybe changing, okay? So, with the passage of the time, the media have lost luster. They have grown large and powerful, provoke the same public skepticism. So, they're provoking the public skepticism. But skepticism does not mean that they're always wrong, okay? So, it is some sort of a distortment, okay? It never says that media always considered wrong or something? No, they may doubt media, but the public will always assume that the media is wrong. No, okay. The media may be wrong. Now, this is a better version of it because it gives that possibility of a skepticism that yes, the media may be wrong. Now, the official and the media may both be wrong. This is a distortion. The author never suggests that both may be wrong. The conflict is presented in either or terms, okay? But both is not the case. So it's saying that either the media is correct or the politicians are correct or the public officials are correct. But they're saying that the both are wrong and somebody else is intelligent. There's a third party that is not being mentioned. The public ignores this piece of news completely. There's nothing in the passage to say that the public ignores anything. So what they're saying is that the media had convinced, so initially they were more reliable than the government. So again, you can see, there are more comparisons. So the journalists were more reliable than the government, but this trend is changing. Okay, with the passage of the time, they have grown large and powerful. They provoke the same public skepticism. So now, whenever they say that the media is more powerful than government, they may doubt it. Okay, skepticism. So they may be wrong. Okay, so both may be wrong, cannot be the case because it's either this or that. Okay, so that is the case. So Americans have concluded that media are no more credible than government. So media is no more credible than government. The public opinion survey, much ambivalence about the press. So by that logic sees the answer. So by this, we are done with this passage number 3. I hope you learned something. Your queries are being solved. But still, in case if you have some queries, please feel free to connect with us. Thank you.